Right now, I'd like to welcome all of you to this seminar. I welcome our international guests. I believe we have guests from Arizona, Texas. We have an international audience, South African people. Welcome to this seminar. So Joe will be giving the presentation. Joe is an ecologist. He conducts environmental research in South Africa, in Namibia, and abroad. With an early background in marine biology, he has extensive experience in many terrestrial environments, particularly arid lands. So his specific fields of research includes biodiversity, community ecology, landscape ecology, environmental monitoring, and restoration ecology. Joe is very well published. He spent the last 7 years of his career in the workforce, working for NRF-SAEON arid lands as the node manager. Joe is currently a research associate of NRF-SAEON. It is not only NRF-SAEON that he is a research associate of currently. He is also affiliated to the Center for Environmental Management of the University of the Free State, as well as the Gabo Nabib Research Institute, where he was a scientist and later a director for 3 decades. So Joe I'm sure he can't wait to share his research with you. And in one of his recent publications, he had a review on the ecology and management of brown locust populations, which is part of the topic that he will be speaking on today. So we will allow Joe to share his presentation. And then if you have any burning questions, you can just type them in the chat box. I will attend to them. But then when Joe is done with his presentation, then you will be given a chance to ask him a question, whether you want to raise your hand, or I will also just go back to the chat box to make sure that all the questions that are there are being addressed. So please enjoy the seminar, and we are looking forward to fruitful discussions at the end. Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Zanella. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, as Zanella said, I'll be speaking about one aspect of my work. 2 years ago, several collaborators and I collated the information we had on the brown locust, which is a species that occurs in the Karoo. So it's very apt for the arid lands. And we wrote up this review to look at what we know, what we don't know, the gaps, how is it managed, and the little bit of the forward-looking aspects. And that's what I'll be speaking about now. I will actually start with the aspect that the locust is one of several nomads that are typical to the Karoo. The framework for nomadism was actually developed by Richard Dean on nomadic birds. He was working in the Karoo. He wrote his PhD thesis on it, and later a global review as a book. And in there, he developed several concepts concerning nomadic birds. And as you will see today, that also applies to at least locusts and maybe also other nomadic or group moving species and organisms. These organisms include people, besides birds. People used to be both resident and move about to where the resources were better. The movements are unpredictable, so it differs from migratory seasonal movements in that the movements are away from where residents used to live to other sites where there are new resources. You will have heard about springbok tracks, and obviously locusts fit into this. The framework starts with there being both residence and nomadic phases. They can switch between the predictable and unpredictable food resources, usually have high reproductive rates, steady population growth, and there's a certain threshold for departing versus deciding to remain resident. Not all residents leave necessarily, so that makes the decision especially interesting. There also seems to be some spatial coupling. If you think of the historic springbok tracks, that were huge numbers of herds coordinated towards a mega herd, and that's the same that's happening with locust swarms. On the way, they need to cope with very high mortalities, many enemies that key in on such masses of moving prey. And they also actually make impacts that are both negative and positive along the road, their routes and at the new destination. The species I'll be talking about is the brown locust, which occurs mainly in South Africa and southern part of Namibia. It's Locustana pardalina. And there have been long-term records on that, dating back to 1797. For the first over 100 years, we have records of when locust outbreaks started and ended. And later on, we have records on the number of districts. These are South African managerial local districts where these outbreaks were recorded. The Pest Control Act, when it was decided that the locusts are having an impact, there were no studies, but it was the opinion that they are causing damage, including on the early railways, and it still happens that way, that if swarms come onto the railways, the wheels don't get traction. So there are all sorts of aspects that it was recognized to have impacts, but it's never been properly studied. The initial studies on the locusts, pioneering studies in the first half of the last century, were by 4 main scientists. There were many more. There are well over 100 publications from that era. But Fourie, Smith, Lee, and Maté, they laid the groundwork, with Smith and Lee spending many years in the field looking at the locusts, especially the solitary ones. And then in 1977, we suddenly backtracked. We being in South Africa, the research and management of locusts, discontinued field observations, refined the insecticides, and tested things like remote sensing and so on. However, none of these studies refined the concepts for managing locust populations as developed in the first half of the century. The 2 phases, main phases, are the solitaria, which are resident, asocial. They occur only in the Nama-Karoo at that stage. That's that pink area here on the map. And at very low density, they're small, cryptic, you can hardly see this one, but they steadily build up the densities. On the other side are the nomadic hypersocial, very visible, conspicuous, and mobile gregaria. They gather into large swarms and they reproduce at a rapid rate to form even larger swarms. In between these two, and that's special for the brown locust, is a transience generation. And that can switch to either the solitaria or the gregaria. And these mechanisms have not been well studied. The locust diet has also not been well studied. The field observations by Smith and later Lee really confirmed that they like short grass, especially the 8-day grass, Inhabitants des Voxie. But when they swarm, they are generalist eaters. And again, there's more anecdotal information of what they eat. Locusts are selective eaters. There are things they prefer, but their food selection is poorly studied and their nutritional needs are unknown as yet. So we don't know what they're actually looking out for when they move over the area. Their reproduction, as one aspect, includes complex eggs. I nickname these smart eggs as well. The one type of eggs is very simple. It's the non-diapause eggs. They are laid mainly by the swarming, the gregaria. They hatch very quickly after the first proper rain in summer. The diapause eggs are much more complex and they can survive for 3 years in the egg form. They build up egg banks with many such eggs. These eggs are drought tolerant. Even though they're sealed, they can actively absorb soil moisture, and they hatch synchronously at the time of swarming. What sets off this synchronous hatching is the million-dollar question. These eggs are placed into egg banks, so only certain areas, specific open habitats, sandy, well-drained soil, and with a lot of this short grass, these little stubs, so like a grazing lawn over the area. And that's what the hoppers eat. The hoppers of the solitaria, they concentrate eating on that. That's what the females select. However, the ecology of this grass and its nutritional value is unknown. We scoured the literature and there's been hardly anything because it's not for livestock, it's not a valuable grass. So it has largely been ignored, even though it is widespread across the whole Karoo. And also what we don't know is how do the locust females find these laying sites, and also the males, because they mate on these egg banks. When looking at the population growth, it's the solitaria that build up the swarms. And for 6 generations, you can hardly notice anything. Every farmer will know there are a few insects, beetles, and others crawling around, and so are solitary locusts. You hardly notice them, they're very cryptic, and suddenly there's a big swarm. Now, Smith had tracked the numbers over generations and noticed that after about 6 generations, there's a switch to the transients. There are still not all that many there, but it's a different form. They look like a different species. And those transients then give rise to the gregaria, the swarming ones. If you plot their numbers on a log scale, you will see it's actually linear. They build up steadily and it's exponential. The reproductive rate is enormous. It's 400% per generation. And you can map that out, why that is so rapid then. To go back, the swarming, once they swarm, they can have 3 generations in one season. The season is the summer season between October and April, maybe May. And if they have 3 generations, that's 400% times 3 in a single year. So if you leave that alone, you get huge numbers of them. The interesting thing is that there is this threshold, a generation that's between the solitaria and the gregaria. They tip either to the gregaria when the conditions remain suitable, not too much, not too little, so it's Goldilocks type of situation. They also, livestock disturbance enhances it. You get crowding of the hoppers, and then they form bands, which then form swarms of gregaria, or they can tip back to solitaria when it's either too dry or too wet, or there's little disturbance by livestock, or there are other aspects. It's not been specifically studied. They can switch back to solitaria. That aspect needs to be much better understood to see how swarms start. Interesting is also, and these are just a few observations scientists have made, is that there seems to be spatial coupling. Lee, in 8 years of field work, he did regular monitoring. He did censuses of these solitaria densities, and at sites that are 600 kilometers apart. So these are quite different rainfall regimes across the Karoo, eastern and western. And he's found that 3 years before an outbreak, all regions dipped to a all-time low the same time, and after that steadily increased. What this spatial increase was about, we have all the rainfall records and other environmental records. He wasn't able to predict, and I looked at his data, uploaded them as in the special materials so that others are able to look at it. I wasn't able to find easy to recognize trends in that. So we don't know what's happening with this spatial coupling. There's also other spatial coupling. That's the movement of the swarms. So you can imagine a swarm of already several billion locusts. They have already formed these massive swarms. They were being pursued by the crews that wanted to spray them as soon as they settle, and 7 swarms converged on one small spot of 500 hectares. That's about an eighth of a local farm in that area of the Karoo. 50 billion locusts on one spot. Now, it's often said their movements are influenced by wind, but some of them flew into the wind. So how they all converged on that one spot left everyone puzzled. I should note that there have been very few records of swarm movements. This is one of them. Very intriguing. These records are there and actually invite more study. We don't know what's going on. These locusts cope with very high mortalities. If you destroy 97% of them in the swarm, they will still have the 400% increase. 3% survival is enough. So you can see that pesticides might suppress the swarms. They don't necessarily destroy them, but they also suppress the locust predators. And there are many species of animals, birds and mammals, and a whole host of other predators that have evolved to cue in on this food. People used to eat them. But obviously now with the toxins, that's no longer done. Having said that, there have been no studies on the overall role of locusts in the Karoo food web. It hasn't been explored what their value is as food and fodder. Before 1911, they used to be harvested, even on a bounty. Government paid for the harvesting, and that the harvested locusts were actually used as fodder. So the locusts are being pursued because of their purported effect on the environment. What we do know is how much money has been spent, and it is a lot. In 2022, those are the most recent records when the outbreaks crossed into 52 districts. 90 million rand was spent on just the pesticides and the application of it. And at the same time, 0 rand was spent on research, which is not unusual because there was no interest in the research. The potential impacts of the brown locusts have always been anecdotal. It's assumed that they are damaging to agriculture. It's never been properly documented. In other words, no one's actually seen and surveyed exactly what's happened once the locusts have arrived at an area. There may also be a lot of collateral damage of pesticides on biodiversity and ecosystem services, but there's never been a cost-benefit study or an EIA to justify these pesticides. And the positive effects of locusts, which have often been speculated on, like nutrients recycling, the felt renewal, you can say that's akin to a fire, and the trophic processes have not been properly explored. We are actually stuck in what has been called the crisis combat apathy cycle. So when there's an outbreak, it's a crisis, you mobilize all the resources, get everything ready and going to combat them. There may be some opportunistic research happening because of the overall interest. There's a lot of media hype and everyone is watching that space. And when the swarms recede, everyone goes home again. There's apathy. There's no need to do anything. Research recedes and everything is still and happy until the next crisis. How can we exit this perpetual cycle? Well, we can try even harder, argue that over the last 100 years, we haven't done things right or worked hard enough on that. We should dispense more pesticides or apply it in a more smarter way. The other thing is to leave it alone, leave the locusts be, and see what happens. But there are probably a lot of concerns there, and therefore one should also look at the adaptive management, which is an aspect that has not been seriously considered. We were on the verge of that in the 1970s, but it needs to be visited at this stage. The adaptive management outline is familiar to a lot of you. You plan, you act, monitor, review, and in the end learn. It's a whole cycle. In the text that I wrote on the side is just an example. For the learning, I would like to really highlight the potential. That's what have we learned in the last cycle to actually join the Global Locust Initiative, where scientists from around the world are discussing the best practices and also lessons learned. And with that, we would be able to revisit the why and how of the next plan and go around the cycle again. Adaptive management never ends. It goes round and round. Everyone is involved, and there are no huge overhead costs like it is with a whole campaign with pesticides. Are we able to get beyond the pesticides and the whole question has been hovering as to, first of all, we need to know more about the locusts themselves, what's going on at the egg banks. But especially what I would like to highlight is the rangeland management. As mentioned earlier on, the farming practices do influence the size of or the number of swarms that are generated. It's therefore we need to understand what's happening with the locusts, with the grasshoppers at the solitary stage. Once they leave, it's very hard to follow the swarms, but also it should be noted that even though there are insecticide spraying teams, people don't observe, they don't record exactly what's happening at those sites where these locusts land in order to understand the various aspects that I've already mentioned that apply to the gregaria. Lastly, we return to the question of these being nomads. So they evolved to disperse and also to have resident populations. It was speculated by one of the early scientists that actually they are nomads. That's the form, but they hide away from predators and so on by being resident at low population from time to time. It's also that times when it's dry and there's not that much to eat. The factors that drive nomadism might be competition, it might be predators, parasites, or diseases. It might also be that they are running low on resources and there are resources elsewhere, like it's rained elsewhere. There are several of us who endeavor to write a review on nomadism in the Karoo because it is originally an open landscape. it and its inhabitants evolved for it to be a open landscape across which birds, people, ungulates, these being springbok and eland and so on, and several insects freely move about and actually affect the environment, not only impacting it, but also rendering ecosystem services. The environmental implications of nomadism need to be better understood, and it's probably instructive to compare very different organisms in what makes them move in order for the Karoo to be actually managed as a whole landscape, as a whole biome. The conservation needs us to understand what the spatial processes are in the ecosystems. This review, although conducted by us, involved many other people who gave inputs, assistance in various ways. Literature helped us with the literature or hosted us on the farms, and we want to thank you all. And lastly, I wish to thank you for listening to me, and we are open to questions. Thank you, Zanella.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you for that. I think you did stick to your time like you promised. So Joe, before we started, he said he hopes to present at as little time as possible so that there can be more time for discussions. So Joe is really looking forward to any discussions that may transpire. So now I will open the floor to any questions or comments for Joe. I will also just go through the chat box to see if there are any questions. Otherwise, if anyone has a question or a comment, please, you can raise your hand. I can't see any hands. Okay, there is DJ. DJ, please go ahead.
Hi, Joe. It's Debbie Jewett from KZN Wildlife. Thanks very much for that very interesting presentation. Can you recall on those earlier studies trying to determine the cause of the outbreak that climatic causes, if they looked at sort of like the preceding winter, was it a dry, wet, or a warmer winter, wetter winter, and those kind of things? Or did they only really look at the summer temperatures and precipitation?
Oh no, the understanding of the outbreak, the first, these are the incipient outbreaks, the first ones that start, very much took winter into consideration. A cold winter, a dry, cold winter is actually necessary before the outbreaks start. It's not sure why that is so, but certainly the winter and the preceding late summer, they haven't been able to crack the code. There's a whole sequence of temperature and moisture. Several rainfalls are needed for this synchronous hatching to actually happen over a large area. So the people who looked at that have not been able to figure out exactly what is that whole sequence, but it does include what's happening in winter. In other words, nothing.
That's great, thanks.
Also, I see there is a message in the chat box from Mira. Do you want to say something about the Global Locust Initiative, just to the audience, or they can just read the...
Yes, I had placed the website there.
No, Mira is there. Mira, you can...
Oh yeah, okay.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much for the presentation. I was happy to be able to join, and our director is also on the call, Dr. Erin Cease. So she's maybe wants to jump in and can add anything else. Yeah, fantastic to get to join an international discussion, and that's kind of what we're all about at the Global Locust Initiative, being able to connect, especially through our locust network, where we have over 200 members from around the world, and all joined on it's a sort of a private professional network that's a bit like social media, but it allows us to have conversations and to connect about our research and share different findings, as well as post questions to some of the world's leading experts on locusts and grasshoppers. And so it really is a fantastic place for anyone that's interested in Orthoptera, but students also, so research, and also on the management side, folks working on similar questions and forecasting and thinking about pretty much exactly how you outlined the vicious cycle, or that cycle where we have these boom and bust events where locusts are very prominent and in the forefront of everyone's mind, and then once their populations decrease, they kind of disappear, and so does the topic. And so our work is to really keep that topic at the front of everyone's mind, and to allow people who are working on this every day or not, but to have a place where the topic stays alive, and we hope to contribute in our ways to help break that vicious cycle. So the network is one arm, and we also do a lot of research. So we have the Global Locust Lab as well, where we're looking at many different aspects, from phenotypic plasticity to physiology and ecology, nutritional ecology, what these locusts eat and how that impacts their behavior and their migration, and all sorts of different amazing topics. So if you, I can put a link to the website as well, where you can check out some of our current projects. And yeah, happy to answer any questions. And if Dr. Cease wants to add anything, lots to discuss. So happy to keep chatting, but I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much, Mira, and she has left the website there. Please also check the chat box. I see there is a hand from Warren. Warren, please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Zanele. Herschel, very ignorant, and perhaps very stupid question, two of them actually. It's related to how exactly, and as somebody that's completely out in the field, how exactly is the swarms or the outbreaks of swarms measured? I'm fascinated by that one site in the Karoo that was identified as one location where the outbreak sort of congregated. And so, I mean, my first question is how exactly was that measured? Did you actually go out physically and count them, or did you use some sort of technological applications to do that? That's the one thing. And then secondly, I'm curious on whether understanding the dynamics or how exactly these outbreaks happen when swarms coagulate at one place, could that potentially be used in a sort of management sense if we understand? I mean, it's a ridiculous question, I know, but can it be used in a sort of management sense? So almost anticipating, we know that land is going to be sacrificial for locusts. Let's use that as a space where they can be. Do you see what I mean? So those are my curiosities.
Yeah. Thanks, Warren. No, that site isn't where they always land. They land all over the place. Actually,
Sure.
The places are difficult to predict. There are certain places that are favored, but as I had maybe not emphasized enough when I showed the map, the swarms also go outside the Karoo, even though that is outside the natural area where the solid terrier, in other words, where the species is resident, actually all the way up to Zimbabwe. So they can, once they get to the crop fields, that's an enormous amount of food. It's superfood. We don't like spraying insecticide on crop fields, and you can see how that escalates rapidly. Having said that, in the last decades, only a few % of the swarms have actually gone outside of the Karoo. In the Karoo itself, we don't actually know what the damage is. Some farmers complain that it is very damaging. Others say, no, it's not damaging, it's actually healthy for the veld. As I said, the swarming has to do with the quality of the veld, and degraded veld actually enhances swarming. And the swarms, where they go, we don't know. They fly with the wind largely, but as that one example showed, also against the wind. So even though we have 100 years of being with these swarms, we still don't know what they do.
Sure. Fascinating. No, thanks very much.
Thanks, Warren.
Interesting. Thank you, Warren. Thank you, Joe. I see there's a hand from William. Please go ahead, William. William, you are muted.
Hello, Joe. Can you hear?
Yes.
Years ago, there was a suggestion that these, the outbreaks are quite regular in some sort of way, and that is there's a suggestion that that is self-regulation within a population. So it's not driven by external factors; it's driven by the internal dynamics and the way in which populations regulate themselves. Has that idea been developed further, or do we not have the mathematical types to do it?
That idea was first floated in the 1950s and 1960s by Lee, who was one of the locust scientists who really looked at that. There are genetic differences. So even if there are no external factors, they will still swarm. They will develop the dispersal type. And that's even in a single egg pod. You can get some that are dispersers and others that are residents. So it is known there are genetic, you could say, almost impulses in the population for these dispersers to arise. The mechanisms for the really big swarms, you can imagine billions of locusts. They don't all arise in one spot. They arise in an area, they congregate, they get more and more and more. That is, those events are not really understood. They usually synchronize with climate. That's why there has been a general overview how this relates to El Nino and La Nina phases, and there is general agreement with that, but it doesn't explain everything. It's that endogenous situation. We have not pursued it at all beyond Lee describing that this is likely what's happening.
Okay, interesting. We do get some analogies rarely in plant populations where there's these self-regulated oscillations because of particular properties of density dependence. And that locust one looks like a real prime example of something of that nature. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, William and Joe, for that. Let me see the chat box. Is there any other questions? I don't see any other hands. I see Prof. Ariansis has written something in the chat box. I think before we started, Joe was telling me about how you are waking up at 5 a.m. on your local time to join this. So please, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, and it's wonderful to see several folks from the network who are able to jump on. Yeah, just to echo Mira, I encourage everyone to join the network. Please share these fantastic resources like this excellent talk. Yeah, thank you so much again for the invitation. My question for you is, so as you're going through your talk, you highlighted many really interesting and important questions about the species, including several million-dollar questions. You're talking to an audience of students and others who might be able to address some of these questions. If I could ask you to kind of think about prioritizing, like what do you think are the next kind of most important questions to answer in terms of better understanding the biology of the brown locust, and then and/or supporting sustainable management efforts?
Well, the one I've mentioned already, and that is really understanding the connection between rangeland management, the livestock, and the stocking rates, and seasonality, and how you manage your farm and manage your veld. The easy one would be to just survey farms across the whole area and see how they've been managed and where outbreaks have been initiated, where they start off. And another one, it might be more tricky, it's more specific, is to actually zoom in on the transience phase. This is the one that can flip to solitary or to gregaria. If one can look more closely at that and see exactly how they switch from one side to the other, what's happening with the locusts, what's happening with the eggs they produce, those transients ones, and what influences that they go one way or the other. Not all locusts around the world have such a transience phase. This brown locust we have, it's almost a boon. We have an intermediate stage. And if we understand that one, we may be able to just keep the outbreaks small or rare. And the locusts are still there.
Yeah, that is interesting that they spend so much time in that transient phase. Lots of interesting questions. The last thing I'd like to share with everyone is there's a new resource that Mira and Rec from our team have put together, and a lot of folks have contributed, called hopperwiki.org. It's a global repository of resources. And then I just noted the brown locust page. We have a brown locust page, and we'd love to have some more contributions toward that. So this can be a way to help us have that adaptive research cycle. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Prof. Then I will give over to Song. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for this presentation. I've learned a lot. And you mentioned that there was a lot of money spent on management and control on the 2022 cycle, but then no money was spent on research. And that seems to be sort of recurring theme in many locust affected countries, including South Africa. And I would like to know whether you have I see that you have a brown locust research, brown locust working group, and the reason I am interested in this is there are, including the Global Locust Initiative, there are researchers around the world who are really interested in understanding the biology of different species of locust, and we're very much interested in building sort of relationship with local scientists to expand the research capacity. So, and personally, I am very interested in understanding the mechanisms of phase change from solitarious to gregarious and vice versa. Of many species of locust, brown locust was actually one of the first species that that had been really worked on in terms of the mechanisms of phase in the 1920s by the people that you mentioned. But later on, as you noted, there's no research since 1977. That's a long time to have a gap. So I'd like to know whether you have the interest and desire to work with international colleagues to be able to really understand the sort of mechanism of this and how we can work together. I don't know, I'm rambling at this point, it's a little early, but yeah.
Well, if I can respond to that, yes, that suggestion is very welcome. I personally am retired. I'm obviously still doing research, revising this, but I'm unable to develop a research group, a lab. I'm an associate at SAEON and at the University of Free State, but I'm not actually running those labs. However, if Ihsan Samuels is online, maybe he would like to respond to that, because I've been trying to stimulate the Agricultural Research Council and various universities to take this matter up. Ihsan, are you there? Is Dr. Samuels on there? Well, he obviously isn't then. Just to answer that, at the University of Western Cape, this is in Cape Town, that's where the initiative is being spearheaded by a rangeland scientist and his working group. They are really looking at the veld condition and wanting to include a research section there on locusts. But Dr. Song, what you're speaking about is really much larger than a small lab situation. This has scope for many studies, genetic, remote sensing. There are all sorts of elements that I needn't even list. You know them. At the moment, there's no South African research institution spearheading that. The Agricultural Research Council actually monitored what was being sprayed for some years, so for some 20 years. Those data haven't been analyzed. These are hundreds of thousands of hopper bands and swarms that were sprayed between the 1980s and the mid-2000s. So it's a potential spatial data set, but it's an unusual research data set that actually has not been looked in further, there's potential to learn about swarm movements in that data set.
Well, thank you so much for that. I actually have one additional question. Some of the pictures that you showed were actually the desert locust, and I know that there's a South African population of the desert locust. Have you seen them sort of interact with the brown locust, or has that ever been a problem, that South African subspecies?
No, the local subspecies of desert locust doesn't typically swarm. I've never seen them together with the brown locusts. They also occur in areas outside of the Karoo. I've seen them in the Namib, at the edge of the Namib desert even. So they are widespread, but they are not known to swarm, and that has intrigued some people who've looked into that. Dr. Song, may I ask you, if there's interest, are you happy that we contact you, also showing that interest? Because I think once the real interest takes off over here, that we will want to have really maximize the discussion with people who have good experience and who also are running labs. My role is more or less stimulating that it happens. And as I said, it's actually in the very next slide, we are looking for a new research champion or champions in South Africa on the brown locust.
Sure, yeah, no, I'd be certainly very interested. I mean, I've visited South Africa many times over the years to study grasshoppers, and I've been to the sort of a northern Cape region as well. There used to be some people who work on grasshoppers from Stellenbosch, but then a lot of people have now retired, and there's not many people left to study grasshoppers, which is a shame because South Africa is a fantastic grasshopper country. So yes, I'll be very interested, and we have the capacity to do a lot of interesting research. I'll be actually joining Arian CEC's lab. So I'll be moving to Arizona, so we'll expand that global locust initiative significantly. So there will be additional opportunities to do research. So yeah, so certainly yes, and you can contact me, and we can talk more. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone. We are exactly at 3 o'clock. Our seminar is supposed to end at exactly 3 o'clock. I see, Joe, the chat box is busy. The chat box is very busy. I think I will capture your questions or your comments for you there. But now we will have to close it here, everyone. Please join the global locust initiatives, like it has been said, and the links have been shared on the chat box. Otherwise, we will have to cut it here for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for the fruitful discussions. And in terms of SAEON seminars, the next one will be held on the 5th of June, 2025, a Thursday. More information will follow from communications. Otherwise, thank you so much for participating in this seminar. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.